Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Epic 7 Arise from Japanime Games. Epic 7 Arise is a 1 to 4 player dungeon crawler experience. It's actually from Farside Games. I think just Japanime is doing the distribution, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, this is a dungeon crawling experience. A dungeon crawling experience with, you're going to be controlling a bunch of characters, you're going to be going through a bunch of various adventures over here, all these different adventures giving you different map tiles, layouts, specifically coming into play with their own unique enemy cards you're being facing off against, with their own unique story cards that you're going through, as you go through a sequence of trying to explore tiles, revealing enemies, then fighting those enemies, trying to take them down through a bit of combo, button mashing kind of action, which we'll get into shortly, and then slowly but surely you're going to be unlocking the next story cards as you accomplish objectives, until eventually you're taking down a bit of a boss. It's not a full dungeon crawler in the sense that there's not really a true degree of terrain and exploration the way there is in a typical dungeon crawler. It's almost more of a wave process where you just look at a tile that's in front of you, you go ahead and deal with the enemies on that. Sometimes you'll have branching tiles, they'll give you different things to focus on, but ultimately you're just going tile by tile, taking down the various enemies in front of you and accomplishing the various objectives you're trying to do so until eventually you accomplish and win that particular episode. That's the core of the arc of this game. The nuances are going to come down to the fact that you're going to be controlling your own individual characters, and this is a semi-cooperative experience in the sense that whenever you defeat enemies, you're going to get rewards, and whoever has the most points at the end of the game is going to be the single winner. You are operating together as a cohesive team. You will heal each other. You'll work with each other in terms of who's going to have the more dangerous spots, who has less health to spare, so you are working together, but ultimately, whoever takes down the most enemies, whoever gets the most points, is going to be the winner of the experience. So it is a semi-cooperative game in which you're going to be controlling your various characters. There's a whole bunch of characters. I believe there's 8 if I'm not mistaken. I only have 4 set up over here because I believe you can play with up to 4 characters in the game. But you're going to go ahead and have these 4 characters. You're going to be going ahead and using your skill cards over here, which are going to be a hand of cards that you're going to play these cards, and as you play them, you're using these cards to trigger your various skills. You're going to have level skills 1, skill 2, and skill 3, and for all characters, Skill 1 involves playing 2 cards of the same number. Skill 2 involves having you play 2 sequential cards, and Skill 3 has you playing 3 cards of the same number. You're going to have blue cards, and you're going to have red cards. Red cards are going to generate a resource you can use to trade in for different things, including powering up more skills, as well as trading cards with other players, or gathering cards from other players to do a dual attack, because again, it's co-op, but also a single winner as you go through it. But meanwhile, as you play cards, you're drawing back more cards from your deck of cards. So you're going to be playing cards to draw more cards, to be able to draw more cards and activate more skills. When you play a blue card, you're going to draw an extra card. So playing a blue card has you drawing 2 cards back into your hand. Meanwhile, there's also artifacts that you're going to be adding to your hand as the game progresses, because as you have these little gems over here, you're going to be trading them in for a variety of effects, but one of those is going to be trying to get more artifact cards which have abilities as well as having numbers on them as well to be able to activate your various skills. And so you're going to be trying to lean into your character's advantages of how they operate, what defensive abilities they have, how much armor are they putting on, are they healing other characters, are they just loading up damage left, right, and center, how are the characters operating as you sit there and play through a handful of cards, because you can have 5 cards, but you're going to play a card, draw 2 cards, play a card to draw another card, play a card to draw another card, until you've gone through most of your deck over here, being able to kind of button mash your way through the enemies, trying to activate combos. You could get stuck, don't get me wrong, but trying to activate the combos in order to take down the enemies along the way. These enemies over here are going to have their own little individual health dials. You're going to spawn enemies based on the enemy deck that is unique to each scenario you're going through. You're going to spawn the enemies, they're going to have their own health, their own armor, their own reward they give you, how they activate an attack, the speed at which they attack, and then potentially the enemy attack card targeting which zone they're going to hit. This enemy over here is going to be hitting zone 6, which is this front line zone over here, and they're going to be dealing with whatever damage as well as negative effects along the way. That's kind of the core idea of the game. There's a bunch of small things to get into. Each individual zone is going to have challenges to go through. Those challenges will have penalties, but also rewards. But the core idea is you have characters, they have their stats, they have their health, their armor, their speed, and how fast they operate. They have the unique skills, the unique abilities that they're going to have, and then you're going to have a random assigned deck of skill cards at the beginning of the game that you do have the option of mulliganing to an extent, which you're going to try to go ahead and utilize those skills to power up, utilize those skill cards to power up your abilities, to try to take down the enemies, to try to do so that you're getting as many points as possible, so that you can be the winner of Epic 7 Arise. That's kind of what's going on here. And now we're going to dive into the review, which is mostly going to be me complaining. Like this, I'll just give you, I'll tell you up front, this is the single worst score I've ever given any game in a review on the channel, and I'll explain a lot more why in final thoughts. But let's start off with a few good things, because there are a few good things in the game. The first is the production quality. Production quality overall is great, and I should be more specific, I have complaints there too. The biggest complaint I have are these health dials over here. These health dials, for whatever reason, I cannot imagine why it is, but this is how an enemy fits onto a health dial over here. This is how they fit on. If you're putting it on properly, you can't see the numbers. All the enemies, in order to actually point to a number on the dial, they have to be off the dial. This is where it is on the bottom of here. They're not on the dial. And it's not the end of the world, but it does mean that every time you put a miniature down a health dial, not only is the health dial not that functional to begin with, not only is it incredibly easy to miss where it is also is just not on the dial. This is true for small, medium, and large enemies. They simply do not sit on the dial. So that's already going to be a small complaint in production, because I'm about to complement the rest of the production, so I want to be very clear that that's really not great. But the miniatures are great. The miniatures over here, the general miniatures you have in the game, the various boss miniatures you have over here, these are all fantastic sculpts, fantastic, you know, I like the design, I like the quality, all these things over here is great, the art is great, the general cards, I would say generally the graphic design is pretty solid. There's a lot of things that are going on in terms of, if you don't account for functionality, but you're just talking about how good the game looks, the game does look pretty good. I'll say that the character abilities are pretty fun. There are some differences and nuances between the characters. A lot of the abilities are simply variations of doing damage, and to that extent, it's a little less interesting. It's like, hey, deal 1 damage. Also, there's ways to power up abilities, to be able to discard either additional cards or resources to power up abilities even further in the game, so that gives you a little more variance and nuance to them. A lot of the abilities do come down to, like, hey, deal anywhere between 1 to 3 damage, with some degree of nuance as far as how they operate, but then there are some more interesting ones. Add armor to your team, heal the team. There are some degree of interesting abilities in the game, and I'd say that in general, the sequence of being able to play a handful of cards, to be able to play cards in order to draw into cards, to be able to activate the next ability, one of the things the game did capture well is that button masher kind of idea of a video game. Epic 7 Arise is a video game, and if you're trying to go for that button mashing kind of concept, the way they have the skill cards play out does feel a little button mashy. You like play, draw, play, draw, play. Okay, great, you did all these things, which the feel of it is present. I have complaints about it because the game's way too, well, I have complaints about it, but the feeling of being a button masher they managed to accomplish. Those are kind of the things I like about the game. Those are the positives I have. The negatives I have a lot of. I have a lot of things that don't work. Starting with that little graphical design thing on the little health dials that's just completely not functional. Not completely not functional, mostly not functional. There's a lot of typos in the game, a lot of typos on the various components. There's a lot of rule things that are just should have been somewhere on the cards and weren't. For example, all these skill 1 abilities, they require 2 cards of the same value. Skill 2 requires 2 sequential cards. Skill 3 requires 3 cards of the same value. That could have been iconography on the cards. It wouldn't have been hard to do so. Not the biggest deal. I'm going to have a bunch of things I'm going to complain about, and some of them are not a big deal. They're more the straw that breaks the camel's back, and others are much more of a big deal to me. So small things like that just get in the way of the ease of the game. Another thing that gets in the way of the ease of the game is the rules are terrible. The rules are genuinely terrible. I'm pretty sure I'm playing this game right. Between looking on the forums and going through the rulebook and really double and triple checking everything I possibly can, I'm pretty sure I'm playing the game right. I'm not 100% sure, mind you, but I'm pretty sure. But the rules are ordered poorly. There's a lot of things not covered. There's sequential stuff in the rulebook. There's a section I started playing the game and I got up to these equipment cards in the artifact deck that the rulebook hadn't told me anything about, because the rulebook doesn't mention them unless you read the campaign section, and in the campaign section it says, by the way, don't use the artifact cards unless you're playing the campaign, which is great, but I didn't read the campaign section because I wasn't playing the campaign, so I only figured that out when I was trying to figure out where in the world the rules for artifacts were mentioned that were equipment artifacts. And there's a lot of things like that. There's a lot of stuff in the game that I'm just not 100% sure I'm playing it correctly, but I referenced forums and I referenced the rulebook, and I'm decently sure I have the right idea as I go through the game, but the rulebook is not good. So it kind of really gets in the way of your ease of being able to play the game. And the game is not that complicated. From what I understand, the game's not that complicated. It's just unnecessarily vague, hoping that players will put together information themselves and be able to piece things together and just kind of end up in the right place at the end of it. Which, to be fair, I did, but it wasn't a pleasant experience along the way. It certainly didn't start me off on a good note for the game. You can be one-shotted in the game before you ever take your first turn. You absolutely can be one-shotted before you take your first turn. All you need is enemies to attack you, to have the right stats in them, and it's not that hard to find it. It almost happened to me. My very first game, it almost happened to me that I almost got one-shot on my very first turn. It's very easy for it to happen. It's not going to happen most of the time, but it can happen. Your character can just simply die. How? Why? What can you do about it? Nothing. You're dead now. Congratulations. I hope you had fun playing the game. But you're going to be targeted in different ways. You're going to get hit with health, and it is up to your teammates to ensure that you work together to be able to balance around that. And I've told you already, this is semi-cooperative. You need to work with your teammates because your teammates are going to help you. Position, try to make sure that everything's all going hunky-dory and the damage is evenly distributed and healing you when they can and trading in health potions. There's all those things going on in the game, but ultimately it is completely semi-co-op. It comes down to one person to win the game, and which leads to the next thingy, which is, this is a game which the player who takes down the enemy gets the reward. And it's usually not that hard to button mash your way through a hand of cards to be able to take down the enemy. And so there's this weird dynamic at play where in theory you just want to always be the person doing things, but there's some degree of theoretical cooperation that isn't always necessary. It mostly comes down to, hey, I'm going to just go ahead and rush in and I'll play the cards. And why am I standing there? Well, because of the order of the track, so I got to go ahead and choose that. Well, that's great, but do I get a turn? Yeah, you'll get a turn eventually. It'll be a turn. So is there any real decision or agency in this game? Not really. We're just going to keep playing cards and button mash our way, and then at the end of it, we'll call someone the winner. Well, what happens if we're playing a solo game? Because you could play this game solo. Oh no, there's no balancing around the game. You're just going to play the game solo, because what difference does it make? You're basically playing the game and winning the game anyway. What about 1 to 3 players? How do we handle that? Oh, well, there are rules for things costing more expensive if you're playing a 1 to 3 player game. Well, isn't the distribution, different at 1, 2, 3, and 4 players? Yes, but at 4 players we'll call it one rule set, and at 1 to 3 players we'll just call it another rule set. There's a bunch of things in the game that just simply don't work in the game. There's so many facets to this that simply it doesn't work as an experience. I want to like the game. The button mashing feeling is there. The character differences are there. The simple enough game to pick up that seems like it could be fun is there, but the sum of its parts is a messy rulebook, component issues, typos on the cards, rules that don't really work, a semi-cooperative experience that doesn't work at all. So many things about this just simply do not work as an experience. I'm sure I can come up with more, but I don't know if I need to. I don't know if I need to. This game does not work. This game does not work. Although we'll cover that soon. As far as what I can see others not liking, I don't know if I need to get into it. I mean, I'm pretty sure my list was fairly exhaustive, and I got a lot of stuff there. As far as final thoughts on Epic 7 Arise, where am I in this one? So first of all, rating-wise, it's a 1.5 out of 5. 1.5, and the 0.5, and it's a minimum rating on any game I have is a 1. There's no 0.5s or zeros, unfortunately. Never needed them until now, and I don't think I'm going to add them to my system, but a 1.5 out of 5. I debated giving it a 1, but I am going to give it the 0.5 because of the fact that, at the end of the day, the production is pretty good. The core structure of the game kind of works, just everything on top of it doesn't. And I could see people enjoying this. I think they're going to be the vast minority of people, but I think they'll exist. If you're a fan of Epic 7 Arise, if you got this game because you just wanted Epic 7 Arise and you didn't care about a game that didn't need to make sense and you don't mind powering through rules that are just not the best, I think you might actually have a halfway decent time if you just don't care about why. If you're willing to power through the hard and you don't care what's really on the other side, then I think you could play a bunch of cards, activate a bunch of abilities, and have a halfway decent time. I think you could. And that is why it gets the 0.5. But for me, it definitely does not work. For me, it's a combination of issues that get in the way of me enjoying it, and the final result is not great either. Like, I was thinking through, I've never rated a game this low that I've actually covered on the channel. The only things I've ever gotten this low in my own personal rating system have usually been terrible prototypes that just should not have existed, and I almost feel that way about Epic 7 Arise, unfortunately. And I was trying to think through, why is this game so bad? When usually for me, my rating system is more often a rating system that goes between a 2.5 and a 5, and the 2.5s are pretty rare, so most of the time it's between a 3 and a 5. Why is this like one of the only times? And I think the answer for me is because most of the time, I'm playing either a game that is clearly designed well, but I'm not the target audience. And when I see that, I don't mind saying, this game's not for me, but I can see why it works. I can see the good in it, and I wouldn't even mind playing it myself. That's a very common concept for me. It's also common for me to be able to say, you know what, I see a bunch of structural issues in this game, but I still had fun with it. Horizon Zero Dawn is a recent example of this, a good example where it was also a semi-co-op game that kind of didn't work in the semi-co-op nature. But everything else around it did work for me. Everything else around that structure was a fun experience, and they had this one aspect, which granted was a core aspect, that didn't work, which is why that got a 3 out of 5, but it's still fun, there's still potential. I since played Forbidden West, and that one had a better structure around that core that built it up, and This, to me, Epic 7 Arise has the worst of both worlds. All the stuff they put you through to actually get to the game makes me not want to play the game. And the final result I have when I get there is simply not a rewarding experience in any real facet past the minimal tangential aspect where they kind of have a fun little aspect where you're button mashing cards and resolving abilities. There's just not a ton of agency or decision space around that, and it's not really satisfying when you take down an enemy because it kind of feels like it was going to happen no matter what you did. And so, 1.5 out of 5. I cannot say that I'm a fan of Epic 7 Arise. I cannot say that I recommend Epic 7 Arise. I think this game is only for the dedicated hardcore fan of Epic 7 Arise who simply wants the experience, knowing full well that it's not really a good example of a great board game. As far as other game recommendations, anything else. But in all seriousness, I'd say if you're looking for a game with a similar theme, but a whole lot more going on to it, but if you're here for the theme, I think Madara is a game that's going to give you a run for your money. And if you're here for the game mechanics, if you're here for something that's going to be in this vein, but a lot more fun, I highly recommend Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape. It's definitely a lot to pick up and get into, but the actual experience you have on the other side is going to be a rewarding dungeon crawler with a whole lot more fun things going on to it. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this review helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.